So, you might ask yourself, if what I've just described in previous videos is the official and lawful way that business is supposed to be done in the executive branch of the federal government of the United States of America, why would there even be such a thing as alternative or unofficial structures of power within the executive government? And the answer is because people are people. For example, many presidents, particularly Woodrow Wilson with a friend of his named Colonel House, or President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Um, oh boy, I'm forgetting the name of a guy that he would send out who was a friend of his. In any case, sometimes he'd send Averell Harriman, but there was another guy who has an odd name, and I'm having difficulty remembering it. In any case, President Roosevelt would send his friend. President Wilson would send his friend. To this day, presidents will often bypass the Secretary of State and send a personal friend as a personal envoy to a foreign leader during a time of difficulty or war. Why? Because the personal friend has the president's ear. They are somebody that the president personally is involved with, personally respects, and therefore is somebody who the foreign leader knows will be able to convey subtlety and nuance in a negotiation with the President of the United States. The State Department will have an ambassador or a charge d'affaires, somebody in the country who was appointed or approved by the president. But it's a far cry from having somebody who's an old personal friend of the president who understands how the president thinks about things and how the president is going to respond. The truth is, when the rubber meets the road, if there is a crisis and you're negotiating with a foreign leader, you want them to really understand what you actually mean, the spirit of what you're saying. And you want them to understand that they will have the ability to convey what they really mean to you, whether it's in the language of diplomatese or not. So that's one reason why the president may bypass his own State Department in dealing with foreign affairs. In the late 1940s, for the first time, the United States was faced with leadership in the what became known as the Cold War. What was going on is that the communists in the Soviet Union were trying to take over the world, and the United States became the leader of the free world after Britain was too exhausted after 2 world wars to take that role on. And as the leader of the free world, the United States tried very hard to contain communism's spread, to limit it. But the federal government of the United States was written at a time when the American Republic was a small collection of very weak states along the edge of the gaping wilderness of the center of North America. So, in order to deal with the realities of being the world's policeman or the leader of the free world, what had to change was the bureaucratic structure of the United States government. So what happens is in 1947, the National Security Council is created. And it includes key diplomats, maybe the Secretary of State, maybe the leader of the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, maybe the head of the FBI, maybe various military leaders or the Secretary of Defense. Whoever the president wants on there as the key players in the ongoing everyday changes in the balance of power between the United States and the leader and the free world and the Soviet Union and the communist world. The National Security Council has persisted after the Cold War and has been useful during the more recent War on Terror and in the growing tensions between China, the People's Republic of China, and the United States of America. The National Security Council is designed to do what all unofficial executive branch structures are designed to do: cut through the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is how governments do their work. They're a bunch of pencil-pushing desk men. That's what the word bureaucrat means from the French, a desk man. So these pencil-pushing desk men handle all the details of government policy and its implementation. But bureaucracy thrives on and produces as a byproduct red tape, which is complications, bureaucratic limitations, following the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law. In other words, bureaucracies, the bigger they are, the more efficient they tend, more inefficient they tend to be. So what these unofficial power structures in the executive branch are about is cutting through the red tape, cutting through the various barriers of the bureaucracy in order to get things done effectively and quickly. In the case of the National Security Council, they were dealing with the most important issue in the world, preventing a global thermonuclear war between us and the Russians, a war that could have destroyed the Earth and all life on it. So, there's an example in addition to the president sending a friend to negotiate. Now, there are other times when the president has made a personal promise to address and wage war on or solve a problem. For example, in the 1960s, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, Kennedy's successor, promised to wage a war on poverty. If we could take all the organization and creativity that we employed in World War II and divert it to stopping the spread of poverty and reducing poverty in the United States, oh, what a wonderful world it could be, Johnson said, being a progressive or a liberal Democrat. And so the war on poverty was set up, and a lot of unofficial structures were done there. In the 1980s, President Reagan used similar language to launch a war on drugs. Yes, aspirin, no. A war on narcotics, on illegal drugs. A war on drug smugglers that bring drug product into the United States, on drug dealers who distribute that product, and on drug users who use the product. So in the 1980s, the war on drugs was run by the drug czar. Now, the word czar comes from Caesar. In the Russian Empire, as it developed in the 14, 15, 16, 17, 1800s, into the 1900s, the emperor of Russia was called Tsar. He was the czar and autocrat of the Russians. Now, the word today is usually spelled T-S-A-R, but 50 and more years ago, the English translation of the word czar is C-Z-A-R, and this is the word that's still used in the American press. So, President Trump may set up an immigration czar to deal with problems on the border, because that's been a big issue of his. What a czar is, what the drug czar was all about, was making sure that the federal government coordinated its actions effectively between departments, preventing the sort of jealousy that can come up between departments from actually stopping good things from happening. For example, if you're dealing with a situation in Morocco that involves American diplomats in the State Department and American spies in the Central Intelligence Agency and American military forces, and that's the Department of Defense, what may happen is that the various people involved, state, CIA, Defense Department, will squabble with one another in front of the foreigners because they have these sort of interdepartmental rivalries. A czar is supposed to cut through that and say, no, cut it out, stop it, bad, be good, be good, and prevent the sort of nonsense bureaucratical struggles. Anyway, the nonsense struggles that develop within bureaucracies. Finally, so czars are one example of unofficial president power. Me talk good today. Of unofficial presidential power and its application. And there are many more. Next time, public relations.